Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a virtual studio visit with David Harper Clemons. I'm Mary Savick, the Lloyd Herman Curator of Craft at the Smithsonian American Art Museum's Renwick Gallery. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Native communities who make our home here in Washington, D.C., the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we are gathered, and the labor of the people who were enslaved in constructing the historic buildings of the American Art Museum and Renwick Gallery. At any point during the program tonight, please use the Q&A box to ask any questions. We will share key information with you throughout the program via the chat box. We also ask that you not close your browser window, as a survey will appear after the program, and we appreciate your feedback about our program tonight. This program is being recorded and will be available on our website. It is also being live captioned, which you can access with the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. The Smithsonian American Art Museum and Renwick Gallery is a nonprofit organization that relies on private donations. We're able to share free digital programs like this one today, thanks to funding from generous supporters like you. Please consider showing your support with a donation today. A link to donate on our website will be posted in the chat box. Thank you so much, David, and my colleagues who have made these virtual studio visits possible, especially Chantel Jones-Williams, Alicia Tomarchenko, Carlos Parada, Gloria Kenyon, and tonight's closed captioner, Candace Martin. It's an honor to introduce David Harper Clemons, an accomplished metalsmith. David was born in El Paso, Texas, and spent much of his life in Austin, Texas. He attended Tulane University, pursuing a degree in biology art, and finished his BFA at the University of Texas, Austin, with an emphasis on painting. He earned his MFA in metalsmithing from San Diego State. David taught in the art department at the University of Arkansas in Little Rock, Arkansas, for 10 years. During 8 of those years, he was responsible for creating and heading the metalsmithing and jewelry department. In 2018, he relocated to Penland, North Carolina to dedicate his time to his craft. The Renwick acquired David's work, The Weight of Deferred Gratification, for our 50th anniversary exhibition, where it is currently on view. I first learned about this work from David during a virtual studio visit in the throes of 2020. David's work is vital to our exhibition because it explores the very function and relevance of craft. He makes beautiful and functional objects like utensils and jewelry, as you'll see tonight. And his work is also crafted to reveal his unique vantage point, offering all of us a deeper, wider perspective of the world around us. Now I'm pleased to turn it over to David, who will begin the program with an introduction of his work, followed by a tour through his studio space with the assistance of Wes. During this tour, please type your questions into the chat and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really enjoying being a participant in this lecture series and studio tour. So I guess I'll just go ahead and get into it. I will share my screen. All right. So fundamentally, I just enjoy making. Making is a way that I'm able to explore the world around me through materials and exploration of those materials. That started very early with exposure to craft from my grandfather. So it was nice to have a role model that showed me the power of making and what that could bring to other people's lives. Early on, a lot of my interest was sort of fueled by reading and science fiction, which were things that sort of opened my mind to all sorts of narrative potentials and really kind of fueled my visual vocabulary for a number of years growing up. And so these are some of the things that I was looking at: comics, Ray Bradbury, and Blade Runner, the movie, which is my all-time favorite movie to this day, and continues to fuel some of my ideas about imagery and storytelling. I think it's really important that as somebody goes through their life as an artist, they get exposure at different points, starting very early on, and then having that exposure continued. And so I was really lucky to have people show up in my life that were very meaningful in presenting me with new directions and new types of work. Ben Sargent was somebody that I followed for a number of years, and then in the 6th grade had a chance to meet him and he signed my books and some of my collection that I had in 3-ring binders of all of his cartoons. And when I needed to develop a cartoon style later on in life as an illustrator, that was something that I looked back at fondly and provided me with definite sort of resource material to work with. After that, moving into high school and then even early college, Deborah Roberts was somebody that was very pivotal. She had a program for young artists that my mom lied about my age to get me into, where she basically brought us in for studio practice and then had different people within the arts community come and do lectures about different topics from law to different illustration fields that you could go into, and even some people in television and film that were working with the arts. So a lot of my work at the very beginning, in undergrad and then even continuing to grad school, still had a lot of painting and drawing. And a lot of it was about, sort of telling stories through images. And I was always fascinated with the figure. So usually somewhere in these images that I was painting at the time, you would see some reference to the figure. And so kind of finishing up with undergrad, had been concurrently taking classes in metalsmithing as well, and was really sort of enchanted by the programming and facilities and other students at San Diego State. And so one of my premier mentors in metalsmithing, my art mother, was Helen Shirk. And so she had this wonderful program of students that were doing a wide array of work. One of the students when I visited was working with silkworms, and another one was doing an enameling. So it was a really rich environment to sort of like thrust myself into and really get a wonderful, rich experience in a lot of aspects of metalsmithing that some of which I hadn't had in undergrad. Other artists I was looking at during that time that were really influential, Art Smith, Lynn Stanionis, did really and continues to do really amazing things with texture and storytelling through found objects that have been cast and assembled. Andy Cooperman is somebody that has become a good friend and whose work I really admire. And I think all these people, the thing that became really rich for me was the way they work with texture and form, but then also have some aspects of the science of the materials. Looking at this Meyer-Millich gray platter, which is an enlargement of the planished surface of metal. That sort of crenulated, fractured edge actually comes from superheating the metal that Andy Cooperman's working with and then smacking it at just the right point, and the metal fractures. And so, the combination of form, storytelling, and surface was definitely the reasons I was sort of looking at some of these people and continue to do so. Following grad school, did a couple of residencies and then ended up in Little Rock, Arkansas, where I was really fortunate to have the experience to help to create this program from the ground up. Lots of grant writing to help put the studio together, and then working with a really diverse student body that ranged in age from 19 to one of my oldest students, I think at the time was 78. And so it made for a really rich experience in terms of like the different histories that these people brought to the work that they were making and to the environment, the student environment. So following that, my wife got hired to be the director of the Penland School of Craft, and that's what brought us out here. And you couldn't really ask for a more enchanting place to kind of land and continue to make. There's a great community of people out here that I get to tap into in terms of their skills and knowledge and expertise, and really fruitful communication, about what we're doing in our studios. I look a lot at materials around me. I'm constantly walking around on the trails out here, picking things up, trying to figure out what physical properties will most lend themselves to helping me tell the stories I want to through objects. And through those objects, creating, kind of illusions to make you think that something might be a certain way, just through the way that the materials that are the component materials have been put together to tell a certain story. Presently, I've been doing a lot of work with found pieces of bone. So these are sort of shards of bone that I found on the trail, reconfigure, trying to stay true to some aspect of the material, some aspect of the fracturing that was already there, and just enhancing it in the finished piece. Working a lot with hollow spaces is something that I'm kind of fascinated by. I like to have things where you can kind of climb into the interior of the form and sort of explore that as well. And then those internal components have a bit of a sound quality to them. Working with similarities in forms is something that really helps me just sort of play with exploring the potential of those materials and the tensions that can be created within a similar format. And so just playing with different surface qualities and luster in these two pieces. Some of the work that I've developed has come from other origins. This is one in a series of pieces that were originally inspired by a short story that I began illustrating, and I got kind of bogged down with the writing and began focusing on the sketches and abstractions of those sketches to create objects. And the series basically revolves around sort of nautical themes. There's boats that appear and references to water, and within the story, the craft that is constructed is ultimately destroyed and obliterated. And so the shards and fragments of that boat form make their way into additional pieces. And even though that series was kind of finished up, I've still kept using some of those visual elements of, sort of nautical pinnings and references to rope and these sort of aged and degraded, almost like water damaged wood forms. So I really enjoy making objects for the home, things that will heighten the experience of an everyday task, whether it's eating or serving somebody else, or retrieving sugar or spices from a jar, trying to make things that have a very rich kind of sensual enticement through the surface and through the manipulation of materials that really just make for a pleasurable experience in engaging with that object. Working with pewter here has really interesting properties in terms of how it receives texture. And then getting the opportunity to play with kind of esoteric, formats. So here is an absinthe spoon. And there's something really nice about getting the opportunity to make these projects that allow me to really dive into kind of strange topics, and learn the history of those topics, because that, again, is a way that I have a greater understanding of the world that I exist in, and really enjoy exploring that. Um, the ironwork that I do, it really is in a lot of respects kind of going back to my beginnings. When I first started doing metalwork, it was larger scale sculptural ironwork and blacksmithing, and kind of slowly moved away from that, making smaller and smaller things, sort of focusing on the detailed components of some of the ironwork that I had been doing. But I really do enjoy going back to that. So my work is kind of split between sort of formal things and social commentary work, looking a lot at finding objects people recognize and then altering those objects. The objects themselves give you an access point because you recognize it and you understand it. And the way that they've been manipulated is what brings to the forefront the narrative that I'm trying to convey. And so this piece references the poem Strange Fruit, but then also the detailing of the single detailed image revolves around the middle passage. So continuing with that same theme of working with strange fruit, created this teapot that has an exterior facade that conceals something sort of sinister. There are ropes with little nooses that bind the interior form and hold it in place. And so creating this sort of notion of decorative facades that conceal, sort of dastardly things. I look a lot at social constructs around me. This was inspired and meant to celebrate the work of lawn care services, a group of individuals that put their bodies on the line to help enrich the visual aesthetics of the people that they work for, and wanting to make sure that they're appreciated. And so this is a bread basket that references, that sacrifice and that work to create beauty. Using bread as a reference to the sacrament. And so the piece that the Smithsonian has right now deals a lot with a lot of the environmental issues that are going on right now and food insecurities around the globe, and trying to create sort of a mapping, so to speak, of how to rectify some of those situations. to mitigate some of the things that are going on, there has to be a greater sense of appreciation for deferred gratification instead of the immediacy that speeds us to some of the ends that we're reaching now in terms of pollution and affecting the earth. One of the current pieces I have going right now in the studio is something in response to, the things that happened over the pandemic. And so this piece is basically a tribute piece to some of the individuals that were killed while in custody or being taken into custody by law enforcement. And when we go through the studio tour, I can talk a bit more about that piece. But it's definitely sort of returning back to a larger scale that I've worked in a while, which is kind of nice. And let's see. And then the other thing that I've continued to practice is kind of a return to drawing. And I've really been feeling kind of a pull lately to draw for the sake of drawing and painting, and not as just a preliminary stage in my work. I would say drawing is probably the best tool that I use and the tool I use with every project. Every project sort of goes through a drawing phase and then moves into the materials that it will ultimately be completed in. And if you want to see more of my work, please go to my website or follow me on Instagram. And that will conclude the presentation. So, did you want me to go back to that main image, Mary, or should we come back to that later?
We could talk about it now if it's convenient for you to bring it back up.
Okay,
Otherwise,
okay. Let me bring it right back up.
I was just going to ask you, you separated your body of work into two categories, thinking about function and then social commentary.
Hmm.
I feel like weight of deferred gratification kind of fits between both of those because it's functional and it also has this commentary. And could you just talk a little bit more about what the background is and what inspired this idea, and also more about what we're looking at?
Right. So I was invited to be an exhibition that dealt with looking at the World's Fair from, I believe, in 1938. I think that's when it was. And that exhibition dealt with sort of projections for the future and had a lot of technology that was new and uh, really kind of like cutting edge at the time. And so, in looking back at this, one of the things that they were suggesting is like, what are the things that we're concerned about now that we would want to tell people in the future? Because again, that's what this World's Fair was sort of dedicated to. And so, for me, one of the things that I kept sort of really looking at was, all the climate things that I was, listening to, podcast about, and then, different crops that are failing because of things that are happening with the climate. And, sort of beginning to look at patterns that have made those things take place. What is it that has driven us to pollute the way that we have and to grow things the way we do that's not sustainable? And so wanted to create something that referenced all of that and that referenced forcing an individual to slow down and sort of understand the process that's necessary to kind of mitigate some of these impacts. And so with this kit, it kind of came from the meals ready to eat that the military uses, these sort of ready to eat to go packets. And so I wanted to make something that was a sort of self-contained packet that had all you needed to prepare a meal, but it was going to focus on needing to pop open one of these little earth pods, plant the seeds that are housed in the handles of the utensils, sprout them, and then you have to transplant them and continue to grow them, cultivate them, for harvest, and then prepare the meal that you're going to eat. But the grains that I've selected are all grains that are, engineered such that they're sustainable to severe weather conditions, whether it's heat and drought or extreme colds. But they're also the seeds that have the highest nutritional yield. And so there's a rice, there's a wheat, and there's a corn that are here in this little kit. So
And I like how you've previously, I think, mentioned that when you do make the food and grow it, the idea is also to share it with people and use it as a way to build community. And
Exactly.
I think that's always a nice sentiment. Thinking about this idea of lingering and slowness, I think this is such a
Hmm.
great way of just thinking about your process in general and these like deep historical dives that are meant to really prompt all of us to slow down and think about history and then through your process watch that happen. And
Right.
I think that's really exciting to sort of when I think about the future, when people talk about the future, as you said, it's often about these tools that are meant to be like these instant fixes or instant
Hmm.
gratification.
Hmm.
And I think with what we're looking at with your work and with craft is sometimes our best fixes are very slow. And that's
Yeah.
really a great message that
Oh,
we're trying to
definitely.
convey. So
Definitely.
speaking of slow craft, you are based in Penland. You wanted to show everybody your studio now. And before we, I guess, talking about the physical space, could you just give a
Mhm.
little backstory of where you are and why this is a special space?
Yeah, so the space that I'm in is what's called the Weaving Cabin, and it was built in 1926. So yeah, it was a space that was constructed by the community with Lucy Morgan to create a housing for where they could give weaving lessons, and then also provide a marketplace for craft items to be sold, specifically textile items that members of the community were generating. And so, yeah, it's a funky little cabin, like right before you get down to what's called the Barnes Complex. And it is. I always joke that my neighbors are the resident artist in the Barnes Complex right behind me, and the squirrels upstairs.
The
So
squirrels? Yeah. So you're on an art school campus. So you also do
yeah.
demonstrations and teach a lot in your studio.
I do. I don't teach so much out of my studio directly, other than a few like online things. But I do teach both at Penland and then at some of the other craft programs around the country.
Okay.
So,
Can we see some of your desk space and
yeah. So I mean, this is basically. I'm just laughing because we have these Asian lady beetles that are crawling
they're
on the desk
attracted to
right
the
now.
lights?
But yeah, a lot of what I do happens here and then in the space back here. So I kind of use this as more of like find joy works. I've got a little brooch that I'm working on right now that again has more of a combination of bone and then rich light.
Mm-hmm.
And I potentially will be putting a garnet on there. I'm not quite sure. But this is bone that I've found while out hiking, and it already had sort of a fracture. So I snapped off that piece and sort of used the line of that fractured element to kind of dictate how the form was going to take place.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think the bone for me, it definitely kind of goes back to part of my history. I've for a brief period, considered going into medicine, in undergrad. And like the reason I was at Tulane was because they had a biology art program. And so interest in the body and anatomical forms is something that's really stuck with me since then. So, a lot of hand tools back there. Adjacent to that is kind of where I do my soldering and hot work. And then further down from there is the enameling kiln, which I'm kind of getting back into more lately. It's something that allows me to create imagery. I'm by no means an enamelist, but I am, I guess, a metal artist that likes to use enamels. Um, so I tend to collect a lot of things, and I guess I'll show you some of that stuff because it definitely kind of,
You probably have a lot of bones somewhere.
yeah. Um, so a lot of found scrap metal,
Mhm.
and it's like I love that surface, that sort of pebbly surface is something that I've tried to emulate in the work that I create. Um, and again, you'll see a lot of this sort of ragged edge that I'm trying to pick up. And I love these things. I think they're beautiful. I'm always sort of picking up scrap metal when I'm out and about. And sometimes I have to watch the pieces until they get just the right level of smashedness and
It's
rust.
that the colors are beautiful on that. I can see how
I
you
think
would
so
want to
too.
translate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I'm always captivated by these. And then, you know, I've really kind of like tried to reduce how much stuff I collect and be a little more selective because otherwise it just becomes hoarding. So, but some of the things that I've got in here, I did this sort of device series of objects. There's a grouping of these weird sort of pseudo-mechanical medical, constructs, and then as well these little specimen displays.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
sort of, playing with the idea of things you would see in a cabinet of curiosity.
Hmm.
Things that you're sort of enticed to look at, but you're also slightly unnerved by, is something that is also, I feel like, a real sort of key point within the work that I make. So kind of going from there, I still do some graphic work. There's some of these posters that are up, and these are things that have allowed me to sort of play with image making, but in a way that is reproducible. So these are linoleum cuts and then wood and metal type to create those images. And again, kind of working with that same notion of, different displays, use a lot of bell jars, again, sort of referencing scientific display.
Hmm.
And then have, these cabinets that have assorted jewelry and housewares in them. Um, and it's kind of a range. I really like working with different scale. That's something that uh, it keeps me invested in the pieces. And I try and use scale that's going to be appropriate for whatever it is that
Hmm.
I'm sort of exploring at that particular time. Um, but again, it's like even with these pieces that are, sort of more concept oriented, trying to use recognizable things as a way to make you question kind of the collision of the forms.
Hmm.
It's like, what does it mean to have this cardboard handle, on a sterling silver, very oxidized sterling silver, set of utensils? Oh,
Appreciate these
mm,
juxtapositions.
oh, thank you. Let's see, what else? Um, so, one of the pieces that was in the presentation is what you're seeing here, this large plank and then the silhouette. And so that's also one of those things where, like, as I kind of moved through the process, it evolved. So there's these etched names, and these are
Hmm.
just the names from sort of the sort of primary years of the pandemic.
Hmm.
That list of names extends in both directions,
Hmm.
unfortunately. But the seesaw, was sort of inspired by conversations that I was having with my kid about some of the things that were going on, and um, trying to think of a symbol that relates to a child's earliest understanding of cause and effect. And so the seesaw became a really kind of simple way to illustrate that, but I thought also a powerful way of illustrating that within the way this piece is going to be constructed, the implication is that yes, you could change the configuration to remove this weight that is weighted down upon the figure. But it's something that requires a level of vigilance and compassion and understanding that we get so wound up with these things, and enraged by what's happening, but then the pattern happens again, and that we just sort of like lose sight of it, move away from it, and stop paying attention, and essentially sleep. We collectively, sleep, and
So this,
so.
so will
Mhm.
this go on the seesaw? Is
So it
that how
goes
you,
underneath
okay.
the seesaw.
Oh, underneath, okay.
So let me grab my drawing pad. Ugh. So, so what will happen
Oh,
is
okay.
that, yeah, so there's this stack here, and it
Mm-hmm.
rests basically at the neck of the
Mm-hmm.
form is where the seesaw will rest. And these are these large pillow forms, to sort of reference sleep, but then the fabrics as well, and that sort of pillow shape, becomes referential to, I think, other things, cotton picking sacks, the way the corners sort of come off, begins to look a little bit like hoods. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's trying to sort of find a symbolic form that, as people look at it, it's going to stir different stories within their own mind. And so I'm just trying to give them, the basic elements to understand and follow the storyline, and then hopefully allow them to build the rest of it, and come to a point where, if nothing else, it creates an avenue for dialogue, either with me or with other people that may be seeing the work where it's exhibited. But that is the ultimate goal, is to, I don't know, incite some incremental change, through communication and raised awareness.
I think it
Um,
goes,
the
it,
piece.
it reminds me a lot of just the very fiber of your work, which is slowness, and maybe asking all of us here even to stop and read just one name and look up the name and like
Yeah,
see the person, learn about their life, and
yeah,
know
yeah,
that their life mattered. And
yeah.
I feel like that is part of this, really being able to use metal in a way that forces this slowness. Someone did ask what the material is for the figure relating to that.
Yeah, so originally, as I'd conceived it, it was going to be plate steel, but in sort of doing some samples, it didn't read like, there wasn't enough of a monument read to it in terms of how you look at that material, and, you might think construction, you might think, armoring. It didn't speak the way
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it to speak. And so kind of looked at other materials, and I found this, sample of this black quartz material that's normally used for like countertops, and thought it was beautiful, and it also fulfilled, I guess sort of necessary requirements of an art piece. It's like you need something that you can transport. Because at one point I thought, well, granite could be great, but granite can be kind of fragile when it's being
Mm-hmm.
transported. And this is a bonded material, so basically it's a combination of black quartz and binders, and so it has a resiliency to it, that makes it something that can be transported and moved, but also has that feel of like, you know uh, monument wall, or
Mm-hmm.
even so.
Yeah, do you see it as a monument or a memorial?
I do.
Yeah. Hmm.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah.
So it's interesting because in your studio, this is one of the few representations I see of a body, but so much of
Mhm.
your work is thinking about how the body will be touching utensils and using utensils. So there's a question
Yeah.
about the emphasis on texture in your work and how it is the other works are more intimately scaled to sort of
Right.
invite the sense of touch and really invite touch. Is that
Hmm.
something that you certainly something you're considering through choice of materials and
Yeah, and it really
function?
is like, so this piece that I'm pointing out now was sort of one of the kind of last, big-ish, sort of metal, like steel sculptural pieces that I did.
Mm-hmm.
I've done some, commission work that's, monumental scale, that's, public art kind of scale. And I guess even public art scale, it's relative. But even with this one, it's like I loved touching it. Like I love the surface quality. And I realized as I was transitioning into doing more small scale work, one of the reasons I did that is that, like this hangs on the wall. I wanted things that you could actually engage and
Mm-hmm.
touch. And so, working with the housewares and working with these different surfaces, and the jewelry allowed me to take the things that I was really enjoying about these bigger pieces and shrink them down and make it where they could be experienced, in a very intimate way.
Mm-hmm. It feels very visceral,
Hmm.
especially that piece. I mean, it does feel, I mean, I can feel it in my body when I'm looking at it. It's so interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was someone who just wanted to comment. I'm really touched and how emotionally invested you are in this work. And I think that is very clear just through all of your very diverse subject matter. And thinking about that, I'm hoping you could back up a little bit and talk
Uh-huh.
about the story arc behind the jewelry that you make that is based on this story of a boat that's at sea. And if we could talk about
Yeah.
that, because I think that's also a really powerful story about struggle and
Yes.
construction and destruction.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the pieces that originally started that series, I've sold. The ones that still sort of used, that sort of form and surface vocabulary are, things like this one,
Mm-hmm.
which was in the slide presentation, and other ones that have
Oh,
these
yeah, that's a great
references.
example.
So here.
So, where did this idea come from?
Well, so I was teaching a workshop at Haystack, and was having a great time at the workshop. And but at the same time, it's like there were some things that were going on personally that I was just really sort of like having this kind of personal quagmire. And in the midst of me sort of having these thoughts and journaling about that stuff, I was watching this boat, try and get out of the little bay behind uh, Haystack, and there was a storm that was coming in, so the water was, kind of choppy, and it was that kind of situation where you could look out, in the distance and see, that there was areas where it was raining a little bit further out, and then the water would get calm, and then it would get choppy again, and so it just, I don't know, sort of fed the idea of this character, wanting to kind of escape from a place, constructing a craft to escape, setting off on this journey, and then a storm coming up, destroying the craft. He has to hobble together, elements to stay afloat, and is just kind of at the mercy of the sea, and ultimately drifts back to where he started. So, but it's like with that return, there were some revelations that took place, during that voyage, uh, that made it different, And so
Mm-hmm.
the way the story ends, it's like there's a bit of an open. It becomes kind of open to your interpretation. It's not something that's just sort of like nicely wrapped up in a bow and offered up to you. It's like you could read the ending in different ways, and yeah. And so, like I said, these pieces that I have here are just using some of those sort of form references. I think this is the only one that I have that still has a buoy connected to it, because some of the other pieces in that series had like these warning buoys.
I love the boot.
So
Yeah.
there's like this little reference to rope here, and then, again, more shards of wood. Um, you know, so, and yeah, the stem here is just a support for display. It's not part of the piece. But, oh, yeah, that's all of that particular series. Well, actually, one more has a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's really
And the thing
beautiful.
too, like I try and make, the pieces interesting on the backs as well. I feel like that's just as important as the front. It becomes kind of an interesting, kind of personal message or dialogue I have with the wearer. They know it's there. I know it's there. If they want to share that with someone else, they can. But it definitely makes these things feel more sculptural,
Mhm.
because I am considering them fully sort of in the round. Um,
I think someone had a great comment that is, I think, really drawing a through line through all of your work and beginning with, I love the idea of texture and bone and metal in your jewelry and the
mhm.
pieces that are used in your home. And I think it would also extend to your monument or memorial. Um, because she says, I love the way you honor the figures in your pieces. And I think
Mm,
that's a great way of putting it, is that you are really honoring the material in all out of this. And the material is paying homage, I think, in a lot of ways to the figures that are the
yeah,
sources, the
yeah.
animals, the
No,
people, or
definitely.
the story of the person who's on the boat. So I really
Mm,
appreciate that. That's a great comment.
definitely. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, I don't know. I've always had a fascination with birds, especially like crows and magpies and ravens, um, and one of the things that a lot of the corvids have in common is that they have this fascination with objects, especially shiny objects. And I often feel like that, where it's just like I get seduced by the properties of a material. It's like that wood grain, or the sort of matte luster you can create, by taking your metal and running it through a machine, a
Mm-hmm.
roller printing, or a roller sandwiched between pieces of sandpaper, and I love that surface. And again, that's kind of that surface that was in that old tin
After the
can.
can, yeah, after the
Yeah. So
can.
the same thing, that
Uh-huh.
sort of, ragged edge. Um, yeah. So
And what material, what kind of metal is this?
that's
This
actually sterling silver.
sterling
It's
steel.
just
Okay.
been oxidized, chemically darkened, with a patina. So
I would love to see a little bit of your pewter work, and
oh, the pattern.
just to talk about when you showed the slide of some of your artistic influences. We didn't see pewter, and I think it's very unique. It's a unique material choice, and I love how you work with it. Could you talk about some of the positives and negatives of working with pewter?
Yeah, definitely. So I was actually just teaching a little workshop in pewter. So some of the things that I would normally have out being shipped back to me.
Oh, no
Um,
worries.
but
Um,
I have some things in the studio that I can just sort of show. And let me get one more.
Someone wrote, the inner magpie is strong, and I think everyone who's watching this video has an inner magpie if they're interested uh in your work. I've always wanted to
Yeah.
attract a crow, but I never have, to be my friend. I don't know if you've ever been able to do that. They're very loyal if you find one.
They are, but they're also very averse to strangers. So it takes a while to kind of like um, get them to let you get close. But yeah, so pewter is something that I really enjoy working with. It really is in a lot of respects like drawing with metal, in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
I can build things easily, I can remove things. It is something that you can solder together, you can weld it. It's really soft in terms of how it takes textures and pattern work. It can be combined with things like brass and other non-ferrous metals. Um, and and the thing that's kind of weird about it too is it's got some properties that are very different than the other non-ferrous metals. And I won't get too technical, but one of the things that happens with most non-ferrous metals, so brass, silver, gold, copper, and the like, is that the more you work them, the harder they get. Pewter is just the opposite. The more you work it, the softer it gets. And so, you have to design in such a way where you either use thicker material, you use compound curves, to create strength, you use rims to help, strengthen the material. But it's just a really, I think, enchanting material in terms of the surface you can get, different lusters. You can polish it up to a mirror finish
Mm-hmm.
or have it, capture again that sort of wood grain surface.
Mm-hmm.
And that's being captured from the silicone mold that the pewter was poured into to cast that shape. So,
It almost seems like it's more ready to capture the history you're trying to impress on it. I feel like
right.
it's just like ready for a lot of history.
It is. It is. I mean, and that's the thing is it's very responsive to, all the different, techniques that you can use, whether it's hammering or etching or, any number of things. Um, and it's a lot of fun. It's very quick
Hmm.
compared to the other stuff that I do. Um,
Hmm.
there's a lot of steps that you get to take out of doing computer work that you have to do with other things, and so it's kind of a rapid process, or can be.
Hmm. Well, now that we've seen a lot of examples of your work,
Mhm.
someone's asking, how do you get your idea? Do they start with the objects or an image or a story?
Uh,
Maybe it depends, but what leads the way for you?
I think all of the above.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, it really depends. I mean, like the things that I was talking about with like the bone stuff. Um, let's see if I have any of those pieces handy. What are those pieces?
There was one back under that light earlier, I thought.
What was it? Let me see. Now I can't move my foot stuff.
It's moved.
Um, I just had them out. Well, I don't have like the one I was looking for. Maybe I didn't bring that back yet. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just, like it's a shape that I like. So I like this
Hmm.
bottom jawbone. I'm
Oh,
not
wow. What are you
exactly
going to do with
sure.
that?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
So sometimes, I have to just sort of stare at it for a while, and then it kind of
Yeah.
like gives me ideas about how it should be manipulated, and turned into something. Another material that I'm working with right now, and this is in real early stages. So some of these sketches you're seeing here will ultimately be some hair jewelry pieces,
Hmm.
but working with, so this is
Hmm.
so weird. Can't believe I'm showing these, but these are dreads
Hmm.
that I'll be using, and so, here it's like this kind of started off with, an interest in Victorian hair jewelry
Hmm.
and, what that signifies, what kind of status that was imbued with, and uh, the fact that there was never a minority presence in that for a number of reasons. And so wanting to kind of create these pieces that insert that presence, but then as well insert some additional stories. And so there'll be, kind of these decorative frames that will go around them. And so that's what like all these little sketches are, just trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out the
Mm-hmm.
mechanics of, how I'm going to design those frames. And then this was like one prototype to figure out ways of backing, the hair. Because originally these things were, a lot of them were backed on ivory, and I'm not going to do that. So needing to find something stable enough and stiff enough to give me a back support, that I can then also attach metal to. And so this is like really thin plywood, like model builder plywood. So it's rigid, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and stiff enough that will support the hair. And then, like I said, I can attach metal to the back of this or screw through it,
Mm-hmm.
and have it hold up. So yeah, sometimes it's material, sometimes it's a story. There's much more to this, but you'll have to wait and see
Well,
as
I'm
the
very
pieces
excited
like
to see what direction
come
it goes
together.
in.
Um, and then like these things, I got introduced to this material, which, I have, on this piece here, and
Mm-hmm.
this is rich light. And so I have a friend out here that made all of the exterior surfaces in her outdoor kitchen and sort of dining area are made with rich light. And so rich light is basically a composite paper material. So it's layers of paper that have been bonded together with pressure and resin. But it's really amazing because you can shape it, and you grab one at a piece real quick. I can shape it and polish it. It can take an even
Mm.
brighter
Ooh, I
polish
love
than
that
that.
juxtaposition.
Yeah, so this is the rich light on this side, and then this is bison bone on this side. And for this one, I actually did order some bone, and it comes in these little, uh, these have been cut down, but they were like these sort of domino-like shapes.
Hmm.
But again,
And
it's
that's
like those I
bison?
could, it's bison. Yeah, at least that's what the website said. So hopefully that's the case. But for
Renwick
these,
has an artist in our collection, two artists, Kevin and Valerie Pouyer, who work with bison horn. We should connect you.
interesting. Yeah. And I went with the ordering this as opposed to relying on finding it because I needed something relatively flat,
Yeah.
and so there's another design I'm working with that is more of this kind of element, a whole series of them that sort of form the members of a necklace. And so, and then I think, like I don't know, it was hard when y'all are asking about like what are my favorite tools. And the tool that I always, use is my drawing pad. I've got tons of these around with notes and sketches, and I think I have a sketch for a piece. Here, let's
We could
pull
do a
that up.
whole talk on these sketchbooks.
Oh my God, yeah. Look at that. All right, so I have this piece here. I'll pull it out of
Uh-huh.
the cabinet. But it was like I kept seeing this form,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't really know what it was. So I just started making some sketches, and this is further along. I think earlier some of the sketches were more like this over here, and then they slowly evolved into that. And then the resulting piece um, was this one. So you can kind of see it's pretty close.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful.
So, and then, this was the back you're seeing there. And yeah, so, I just try and be as kind of open to, what is presenting itself to me, whether it's ideas like just seeing a form in my head or some material. And then, the most consistent sort of filtering element for everything is the drawing pad. That lets me
Mm,
kind of work through those forms in different ways, in a way that's much more expeditious than the metalwork. And I
mhm,
try not to like design. I try and design it enough, so it's like
mhm,
even these sketches, of the mechanics of this piece. It's like if I need to make them more precise, then I will. But earlier on, I would do really precise drawings, and then I got
mhm,
bored. Like by the time I
mhm.
started in the metal, it's just like I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So I have
So
to
you're
leave myself,
synthesizing. Yeah.
yeah, and I have to leave myself some place to explore some
Also,
uncharted thing
yeah.
that I don't know.
In a way, you're starting with these materials and these surfaces, and also your own impressions just of life around you. You're
Yeah,
synthesizing
yeah,
it through drawing, but then you have to go back to the materials and learn more and
definitely.
change.
Yep.
Along
Yep.
those lines, someone said the way you create pieces from found materials, natural bone like wood or natural like bone or wood, a way of bringing the past to the present and giving those materials a sense of intergenerational communication, of regeneration, and even of immortality. All of the
Oh,
above.
man, I like all that. I
Yeah,
think
that
the
sounds
thing that,
great.
that definitely like rings true is I've never really thought about it. It's like an intergenerationality thing, which makes a lot of sense because it's like, these things hopefully will live long after I do.
Mhm,
And so I guess that is a kind of an innate component. I think a lot of what I'm trying to do is to celebrate the materials.
mhm,
It's like I want people to get the same kind of excitement and I don't know, even glee out of,
mhm.
like it's like what is that? It's like they may not recognize exactly what I've done to that material, but it's like they want to touch it, they want to experience it, they want to investigate it. And so, it's like creating that excitement, elevating the materials, transforming them, in a way that gives them a different value placing, you know. Um, so it's like even though this is just maybe wood right here or this is bone, it's like I want to make it have the same sort of value that we associate with the metal or with the gemstones. And
Mhm.
so
I think you are
yeah.
translating your curiosity for the world around you into
Hmm.
these works that I do think is very contagious. And I think we can all just see these materials and these surfaces and textures in a very new way. And we're very grateful that you could bring this to us.
Oh, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, of course. There are many compliments that are in the Q&A right now. People just um, are just saying, Sandra Sherman says you're very multi-talented. So there's some nice
Hey,
jeweler to
Sandra.
jeweler love. And Kim Kridler says the threads and morning jewelry is also a really great take. So we're just going to share some artist love before we wrap up.
Thank
And thank
you.
you so
Means a
much,
lot.
David, for sharing your studio and your
Thank you.
concepts and just your life outlook with us. And hopefully all of us can be inspired by you to slow down and appreciate our lives more and maybe find something in our walks every day that gives us something to pause and reflect on in a positive way. So thank you
I
all
agree.
so much for joining us this evening. And thank you so much for your support. We're so happy to see you and have a great night. Thank you. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, David. It was great to see you all.